Hello everyone. Before we start, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. That's how YouTube keeps sending you stories like this. And now, let's get into it. I left Kingman later than I meant to. I had told myself I would stop early, get a room, sleep it off, but the road kept pulling me forward. Route 66 eastbound after midnight has a way of doing that. The town lights faded fast, and the dark took over like a blanket pulled tight. My headlights cut a narrow tunnel through scrub, rock and open nothing. No music. The radio stayed off because static only made my eyes heavier. I cracked the windows to let the desert air slap me awake. It smelled like dust and cold stone. That dry nighttime smell you only get out there. I had been driving most of the day. My shoulders ached from gripping the wheel. My eyelids felt gritty. Every few minutes I checked the speedometer. Then the mirrors, then the empty road ahead. The painted lines felt hypnotic, sliding under me at a steady pace. I remember thinking I should have planned better. Should not have trusted myself to push through another stretch of nothing after midnight. The road east of Kingman is wide and straight in places, then suddenly narrow, with long shoulders made of pale gravel and dirt. The desert opens up and closes again without warning. One moment there is a low ridge, the next a flat expanse that feels like the bottom of the ocean. Around mile marker 48, my thoughts were drifting, not asleep but not sharp either. That was when headlights appeared behind me. At first they were far back, just a faint glow cresting a rise. I watched them in the mirror, waiting for them to pass. Instead, they gained slowly. Then the lights flicked bright once, then again. The flashes were clean and deliberate. Not high beams by accident. Not a bounce in the road. My stomach tightened in that automatic way it does when something shifts from normal to uncertain. I checked my speed again. I was right where I should be. The lights flashed once more. Out there late at night with no other cars, my brain filled in the blanks. I assumed it was a state trooper. It made sense. I had seen them before on long desert stretches, pulling over tired drivers, watching for drunks. I told myself it was better to stop now than to have them ride my bumper for miles. I slowed and eased onto the shoulder. Gravel crunched under my tires. Dust lifted and hung in my headlights like smoke. I put the car in park and waited, hands resting on the wheel, heart steady but alert. The headlights behind me did not settle the way patrol lights usually do. There were no red or blue reflections, just white beams, low and wide. The vehicle rolled up behind me and stopped too close. The engine idled loud in the quiet. When I glanced in the mirror, I saw the shape of a pickup truck, white, boxy, older. No light bar on top. No markings on the side that I could see. That was the first real spike of fear, sharp and immediate. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. There are unmarked vehicles. There are rural officers who drive plain trucks. Still, my mouth went dry. Both doors opened at once. Two shapes stepped out. Their boots hit the pavement hard. One moved toward the back of my car and stayed there, just outside my rear lights. The other came up along the driver's side. He stopped at my window. I could see his outline clearly now, his shoulders, his head close to the glass. His face stayed in shadow, blocked by the angle of my light and the brim of his cap. One of his hands stayed buried in his jacket pocket the entire time. Everything felt wrong in a way that was hard to explain, but impossible to ignore. The road was completely empty in both directions. No distant engine noise. No wind. Just the low idle of the truck behind me and the ticking of my own engine cooling. I could not see any badge, any radio, anything official. The man by my trunk shifted his weight, close enough that I could feel his presence more than see it. I did not roll the window down all the way. I did not turn the engine off. My foot hovered near the brake, tense ready. My heart was pounding now, loud enough that it filled my ears. I remember noticing small details with strange clarity, like the dust streaks on my dashboard, the faint crack in the windshield I had forgotten about, The way my hands were trembling, just enough to make the steering wheel vibrate. The man at the window leaned in slightly, as if trying to look past me into the car. His posture carried a casual confidence that did not fit the situation. He glanced down the road, then back at me. His hand never moved from his pocket. No official gestures, no routine motions. Just waiting. Something in me flipped then, a switch from cautious to certain. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a harmless stop. The desert around us felt suddenly hostile, like it was closing in. I knew I had seconds, maybe less, to make a choice. If I hesitated, if I tried to be polite, if I waited for clarity, I would lose whatever small advantage I still had. I did not look at them again. I did not signal. I dropped the car into drive and slammed my foot down. Gravel sprayed. The engine roared. For a split second, the car fishtailed as the tires fought for grip. Then we were moving, hard and fast, pulling back onto the road. In the mirror, I saw them react. The man at my window jumped back. The truck lurched forward almost immediately. Its headlights filled my mirrors, bright and close. I pushed the speed up past where I was comfortable, past where I should have been on that road. The lines blurred. The desert became a dark smear on either side. They stayed with me. The truck did not fall back. It did not flash its lights again. It just followed, steady and relentless. My thoughts narrowed to simple things. Keep it straight. Do not miss a curve. Do not slow down. My hands were locked on the wheel so tight they ached. There was no cell service. I checked without really expecting anything. Just a blank screen and a spinning icon that went nowhere. The road stretched on mile after mile, with nothing but darkness ahead. I tried to remember where the next town was, how far I had to go. Every sign I passed felt like a lifeline and a threat at the same time. At one point, the truck closed the gap even more, so close that my rearview mirror shook from the air pressure. I imagined them reaching out, grabbing my bumper. I imagined being forced off the road, into the dirt and rocks where no one would see or hear anything. The fear was physical, heavy in my chest, making my breathing shallow and fast. I do not know exactly how long they followed me. Time stretched and warped. It felt endless, but it could not have been more than 15 or 20 minutes. Eventually, far ahead, I saw a glow on the horizon. A cluster of lights, low and steady. A gas station open late, a small oasis in the dark. I aimed for it like it was the only solid thing left in the world. As I got closer, I could make out the shape of the building, the canopy, the pumps. The parking lot was lit bright enough to hurt my eyes after all that darkness. I pulled in fast and hard, braking late, tires squealing slightly as I swung under the lights. I did not turn the engine off. I just sat there, chest heaving, staring straight ahead. The pickup slowed as it passed the entrance. For a moment, I thought it might follow me in. Instead, it kept going, rolling past the station and disappearing back into the dark stretch of road it had come from. No hesitation. No attempt to hide. Just gone. I waited a long time before I moved. Other cars came and went. A trucker filled his tank. Someone went inside for coffee. The normal sounds of a late night stop slowly brought my heart rate down. When I finally stepped out of my car, my legs felt weak, like I had just run miles. I walked around to the back, almost without thinking, drawn by a need to check something. The dust on my rear bumper was thick from the shoulder and the road. In it, clear as day under the station lights, were handprints. 2 of them, fresh. Smudged but distinct, fingers spread, pressed hard into the dirt. They were placed exactly where someone would put their hands to steady themselves, standing close behind my car. I stood there staring until the shock wore off and left only a cold, steady understanding. The men had not been guessing. They had already touched my car. They had already decided how close they could get. I washed the dust off before I left, scrubbing the bumper longer than necessary. I filled up, went inside, and sat for a while where other people could see me. When I finally got back on the road, I stayed with traffic, such as it was, and I stopped as soon as I could to get a room. I did not sleep much that night. The image of those headlights in my mirror kept replaying, the way the desert swallowed everything beyond the reach of my beams. Even now, when I drive that stretch east of Kingman, I do not pull over for anyone out there. If lights flash behind me in the dark, I keep going until there are witnesses, until there is nowhere for the road to hide what is happening. I had been driving since early evening, pushing across western South Dakota with the radio off and the dash lights turned low. I was trying to keep my eyes from getting tired, letting the darkness do most of the work. The road west of Wall felt endless at that hour, a straight black ribbon cutting through open land that looked empty even in daylight. At night it felt abandoned, like the world had pulled back and left only asphalt, wind, and the occasional semi roaring past in the opposite direction. By the time I saw the sign for the rest area, the clock on the dash read 3:27 a.m. I hadn't planned to stop there. I had planned to push another hour at least. But my bladder had other ideas, and my head was starting to buzz in that way it does when you've been awake too long and caffeine has stopped helping. The idea of pulling over, stretching my legs, and using a real bathroom instead of a bottle tipped the balance. The rest area sat a little ways off the highway, down a short access road. My headlights swept over empty parking spaces, picnic tables, and a low concrete building with dark windows. There were no cars parked there, no RVs, nothing. Just the steady wind bending the grass, and the distant sound of trucks moving along the interstate like waves breaking far out at sea. I parked under one of the lights. Though calling it a light felt generous, it gave off a weak yellow glow that barely reached the edges of the pavement. I shut off the engine, and the silence settled in immediately, thick and heavy. Without the hum of the car, I could hear the wind more clearly, pushing through the trees at the edge of the rest area, and every so often the low growl of a semi passing by. Never close enough to feel, just close enough to remind me the road was still there. I sat in the car for a few seconds longer than necessary, checking my phone even though there was no signal. That pause felt normal at the time, just fatigue, just reluctance to step out into the cold dark. I grabbed my jacket, locked the car out of habit, and walked toward the building. The concrete walkway was cracked and uneven. My footsteps sounded too loud. The building itself was plain and utilitarian, the kind designed to be easy to clean and impossible to make welcoming. The men's room door was propped open, a rectangle of dull fluorescent light spilling onto the pavement. Inside, the air smelled like disinfectant layered over something older and harder to scrub away. The lights hummed softly. There were 3 sinks along one wall, a long mirror above them, and a row of stalls on the opposite side. One of the stall doors was closed. The other 2 were open, empty. I noticed the closed door right away, but it didn't strike me as strange. Rest areas were used by all kinds of people at all kinds of hours. Someone else was just using the bathroom. That was all. I took the urinal closest to the door, did what I needed to do, and then moved to the sinks. The mirror showed my own face looking pale and tired, eyes slightly unfocused. I turned on the faucet and let the cold water run over my hands, rubbing them together slowly, trying to wake myself up. That was when I heard the breathing. At first, I thought it was me. My own breath, louder in the quiet room. But then I realized the sound wasn't matching my movements. It was slower, more deliberate. Each inhale and exhale was measured, controlled, like someone consciously regulating it. It was close. Much closer than it should have been if it were coming from inside the stall. I froze with my hands under the running water. The sound didn't change. It didn't speed up or hitch the way someone's breathing does when they're surprised or embarrassed. It stayed steady, patient, almost calm. My eyes lifted slightly, not to look behind me but to watch the mirror. I could see the edge of the stall row in the reflection. I could see the closed door. Nothing else moved. The breathing continued. I shut off the water as quietly as I could. The sudden silence made the sound stand out even more. It was unmistakable now. Someone was standing very near me, just out of my line of sight. Then the stall door creaked. It wasn't the sound of someone stepping out, no shuffle of feet, no change in the breathing pattern. Just the slow, soft movement of the door swinging inward, the metal hinge complaining in a long, tired groan. I didn't turn around. I don't know why exactly. Some part of my brain made a decision without consulting the rest of me. Looking felt like it would make things worse, like it would turn something manageable into something final. I dried my hands on my jeans, took a single step backward, then another. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The breathing was still there, still close, still calm. I backed toward the door, pushed it open, and stepped out into the night. The cold air hit me like a slap. I broke into a run without thinking, my shoes slapping against the pavement, the sound echoing too loudly in the open space. I fumbled with my keys, nearly dropping them, my hands shaking so badly it took 2 tries to get the right one into the lock. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and locked it immediately. My hands were slick with sweat as I started the engine. The headlights flared to life, washing the rest area in white light. For a brief moment, everything looked normal. Empty parking spaces, picnic tables, the dark shape of the building behind me. Then, as I pulled forward and turned toward the exit, my headlights swept across the trees at the edge of the rest area. Someone was standing there. They were positioned just beyond the reach of the light, partly in shadow, between 2 thin trees. I couldn't make out details of their face, but I could see the outline of a body, upright and still, facing directly toward me. They didn't raise a hand or step forward. They didn't react at all. They just stood there, watching. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I drove straight out onto the access road and back onto the highway, my tires humming on the pavement, the familiar lines of the road snapping back into view. I kept driving for a long time after that. I didn't turn the radio on. I didn't look at my phone. I just focused on the road ahead, letting the passing reflectors mark time. Eventually, my breathing slowed. My hands stopped shaking. By the time the sun began to lighten the horizon, the fear had dulled into something else. Something heavier and more unsettling. I started thinking about what had happened in concrete terms, stripping away the panic and looking at the facts. The rest area had been empty when I arrived. No cars, no obvious signs of anyone else around. The person in the bathroom had made no attempt to hide their presence, but also no attempt to engage. The breathing had been controlled, intentional. The stall door had opened slowly, as if to announce movement without making it sudden, and the person by the trees hadn't chased me. They hadn't tried to stop me. They had just watched me leave. The most likely explanation, the one that made the most sense no matter how much I disliked it, was that someone had been using the rest area as a place to linger, to observe people passing through. Someone who knew that at 3:30 in the morning, a lone traveler would be tired, isolated, and vulnerable. Someone who had positioned themselves to see who arrived and how they reacted. I realized then that the closed stall door might not have been about using the bathroom at all. It could have been about waiting, about listening, about seeing how close they could get without being noticed. I didn't stop at another rest area for the remainder of that trip. I waited until I reached a town with lights, people, and open businesses before I pulled over again. Even then, I stayed inside my car for a while, watching the door of the gas station, making sure the normal rhythm of life was really there. Years have passed since that night, but I still think about it whenever I see a rest area sign glowing in the dark. I think about how thin the line is between routine and danger, how easily a familiar place can become something else entirely when the conditions are right. What stays with me the most is not the fear, but the restraint. Whoever that person was, they chose not to follow. They chose not to escalate. That choice is the only reason the story ends with me driving away, alive and intact, instead of becoming another warning someone tells in hindsight. I don't know what they wanted. I only know that I was close enough to find out, and that I was lucky enough not to. I had been watching the fuel gauge sink lower mile by mile across eastern California, the needle dropping faster than I expected, like it was being pulled down by the heat itself. The desert had gone fully dark by then. Not the soft dark of towns or highways with light spill, but a thick, swallowing dark that felt pressed up against the windshield. The kind where your headlights feel small and temporary. Blythe showed up as a faint glow long before any sign told me I had reached it. I remember feeling relief that surprised me. I had not realized how tense I'd been until the idea of gas became real again. The station sat right on the edge of town, where the buildings thin out and the desert starts pushing back in. One canopy, faded paint, a few dim lights that buzzed faintly. Everything else around it was either closed or set far back from the road. There were no other cars pulling in or out. I rolled in just before midnight, the clock on the dash flipping over as I slowed to a stop. The quiet hit me first. No traffic noise, no music from nearby cars. Just the low hum of my engine and the faint rattle of wind brushing sand against metal. Only one pump had its lights on. The others were dark, their screens dead, hoses hanging like limp arms. I pulled up to the working one and shut off the car. The sudden silence felt too complete. Inside the small building, the clerk stood behind thick bulletproof glass, shoulders slumped, eyes locked on a television mounted high on the wall. The sound was off. The screen flickered through colors that reflected weakly on the glass. The clerk did not look up when I walked past the window. Not when the door chimed. Not when I stepped back outside. I started pumping gas. The smell of fuel mixed with the dry desert air in a way that felt sharp in my nose. I stood there longer than I needed to, holding the nozzle, watching the numbers crawl upward. I did not look at my phone. There was no signal anyway. The screen showed nothing but a blank bar. That made the quiet heavier. I shifted my weight and scanned the edges of the lot out of habit more than fear. That was when I noticed the sedan. It was parked behind me, farther back than I remembered seeing when I pulled in. Dark color, older model. The engine was running. I could see the faint shimmer of heat from the exhaust in the pump light. The headlights were off. So were the interior lights. It had not been there when I stopped. I was sure of that. I would have noticed another car in a place this empty. The station lot was small. There was nowhere for it to hide. I told myself it had pulled in quietly while I was focused on the pump. That happens sometimes. I tried to let the thought settle. It did not. The sedan stayed exactly where it was, idling, not moving forward to another pump, not shutting off, just waiting. The windows were dark. I could not see anyone inside. The pump clicked off. I put the nozzle back, the sound loud in the still air. I screwed the cap on slower than usual, feeling the weight of the moment stretch out. The sedan did not move. The clerk inside still had not looked up. The television continued its silent flicker. I felt exposed standing there, like the open space of the lot had turned into something narrow and focused, with me at the center of it. I walked back to my car and got in. The seat felt warmer than it should have, like it had been holding my shape. I shut the door and locked it automatically. My eyes went to the mirror before I started the engine. The sedan rolled forward. It moved smoothly, deliberately, and stopped just short of my rear bumper, angled slightly so that I could not back straight out. The headlights stayed off. The engine continued to idle. My chest tightened in a way that felt physical, like a hand pressing inward. I started my car and shifted into reverse without thinking. There was nowhere to go. The driver's door of the sedan opened. A man stepped out. He moved with a calm that did not match the situation. No hurry. No hesitation. He was of average build, wearing dark clothes that blended into the night. He walked toward my window, the crunch of gravel under his shoes sounding too loud. In his hand was a coin. I could see it catch the pump light as he raised it and tapped it gently against my glass. The sound was soft but precise. Not knocking, not pounding, just a small, deliberate tap. He did it again. My hands were already gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers hurt. I did not look directly at his face. I could see the outline of his head and shoulders reflected faintly in the glass. But I focused past him instead, toward the building. The clerk still had not moved, still staring at the television. The glass between us felt thicker than it had a moment ago, like it belonged to another world entirely. I realized then that no one else was coming. There would be no interruption. No passing car, no sudden attention. The man with the coin stood there patiently, waiting for something I did not want to imagine. The sedan behind me continued to idle, blocking the way out. The pump island was just close enough on my right that pulling forward was not an option. Something inside me shifted. The fear sharpened into action. I shifted into reverse and pressed the accelerator hard, turning the wheel at the same time. The car lurched back and to the side. There was a loud crack and a grinding thud as I clipped the pump. The impact jolted me forward in the seat. I felt it through my spine. The man stepped back quickly, more surprised than angry, his shape jumping out of the way. I did not stop. I did not check the damage. I threw the car into drive and sped forward, tires squealing briefly as they caught traction. I shot out of the lot and onto the road, the desert opening up ahead of me again. In the mirror, I saw the station lights recede. I did not see the sedan follow. My fuel door was flapping open, the warning light glowing on the dash. The car felt wrong, like it was rattling in places it hadn't before. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I drove with both hands locked on the wheel, eyes glued to the road, expecting headlights to appear behind me at any second. They never did. The miles stretched out. The darkness returned, thicker than before. My breathing slowly steadied, but my hands kept shaking. Even after the adrenaline faded, the tremor stayed. I replayed the scene again and again in my head, noticing new details each time. How calm the man had been. How deliberate the tap of the coin sounded. How the clerk never once looked up, as if whatever was happening outside did not exist. An hour later, I pulled into a brightly lit rest area closer to the Colorado River. There were other cars there, trucks, people moving. I parked and sat for a long time before getting out. When I finally did, I saw the scrape along my rear panel and the bent edge of the pump's imprint. The fuel door hung loose, scratched and dirty. Nothing else happened that night. I made it where I was going without further trouble. But the feeling from that gas stop followed me longer than the drive itself. Not as a sudden jolt of fear, but as a slow understanding that there are places where attention is optional, where help is sealed behind glass and noise is turned off, and where small, quiet actions can mean more than shouting ever could. Even now, when I stop for gas late at night, I find myself scanning mirrors and shadows, listening for sounds that are too soft to ignore, and remembering how quickly a normal stop can turn into something that stays with you long after the road has moved on. I reached Tucumcari later than I planned, the sky already black and flat, the stars dulled by haze and highway glow. I had been driving since sunrise, cutting east across Arizona and into New Mexico, letting the miles stack up until everything outside the windshield felt unreal. My eyes burned, my shoulders ached, and every gas stop felt like wading through syrup. By the time I saw the faded motel sign blinking Motel with the E dead, I did not care what it looked like. I just wanted a bed and a locked door. The motel sat a little back from the road, a single-story U-shape wrapped around a cracked asphalt lot. The parking spaces were painted years ago and mostly gone. A soda machine hummed near the office, the sound echoing too loudly in the open air. I parked close to my room, grabbed my overnight bag and checked in. The clerk barely looked up, the light behind the counter harsh and buzzing. He slid the key across and reminded me not to leave valuables in my car. It was said flatly, not friendly and not threatening, just a fact. That stuck with me more than it should have. My room smelled like old cleaner and desert dust. The carpet was worn thin in paths where feet had passed for decades. I locked the door, slid the chain, and checked the window. The air conditioner rattled when I turned it on, coughing out lukewarm air that slowly cooled. I set my bag on the chair, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the bed for a moment, feeling the springs complain under my weight. The quiet felt too big. Every sound traveled, from the distant highway to a door closing somewhere down the row. Before sleeping, I glanced through the thin curtains. My car sat under a flickering light, the paint dull with road grime. I remembered the warning and debated going back out to check it, but exhaustion won. I told myself I had locked it like I always did. I lay down fully dressed, the blanket scratchy against my arms, and let the hum of the air conditioner pull me under. Sometime later, I woke without knowing why. The room was dark except for the orange glow sneaking in around the curtains. The air conditioner had shut off, leaving the room thick and still. My phone said a little after 2 in the morning. I lay there listening, my heart slow but alert, the way it gets when something is off but you cannot name it. Then I heard footsteps. They were outside, on the concrete walkway that ran along the doors. Slow and uneven, not the quick pace of someone passing through. Each step sounded deliberate, shoes scraping lightly, then lifting. They stopped near my door. I held my breath without meaning to, my body going tight all at once. The handle moved. It was not a hard yank or a rattle. It turned slowly, testing. Metal whispered against metal. The door did not open because the lock held, but the pressure was clear. Whoever was there knew exactly how much force to use. Enough to feel the lock, not enough to make noise. I lay frozen, staring at the ceiling, my ears ringing. My mind raced through useless thoughts. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone had the wrong room. But the chain was set, the deadbolt thrown. The handle moved again, just a fraction, like fingers adjusting their grip. The footsteps shifted. A shadow passed under the door, blocking the thin strip of light from outside. I could see the shape of legs, the pause, the weight settling. The shadow lingered. I could almost feel someone standing inches away, listening the way I was listening, waiting for any sound that would tell them if the room was empty or not. I did not move. I did not cough or swallow. My phone lay on the nightstand, dark. I did not reach for it. The idea of the screen lighting up felt too loud, too revealing. Time stretched. My muscles started to ache from holding still. The shadow moved slightly, then stopped again. I imagined a hand hovering near the handle, ready to try once more. Instead, the footsteps retreated, slow and careful, moving down the walkway and fading into the night. I stayed awake for a long time after that. I counted my breaths. I listened for every distant sound. A car passed on the highway. A door slammed somewhere far off. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me into a shallow sleep, the kind filled with half-dreams where every noise drags you back to the surface. Morning came pale and dusty. Sunlight leaked through the curtains, showing the room in harsh detail. I lay there for a minute, convincing myself it had really happened and was not something my tired brain invented. My body still felt tense, my jaw sore from clenching. I got up and checked the door. The lock was intact, no marks, no damage. The chain hung where I left it. The window was still latched. The room looked the same as it had the night before. Outside, the motel looked smaller in daylight. The paint was more faded, the cracks more obvious. I walked straight to my car. The driver's door was unlocked. I knew I had locked it. I always did, even in my own driveway. I opened the door slowly, half expecting something to jump out. The inside smelled faintly of dust and old fast food. The glove box hung open, its contents dumped onto the seat. Maps, receipts, a tire gauge, loose coins. Everything was there. Nothing was taken. I checked the trunk. Still locked. The rest of the car looked untouched. No broken windows, no damage. Just searched carefully and thoroughly. Standing there in the quiet lot, it finally made sense. The warning from the clerk. The careful way the handle had been tested. The fact that nothing was stolen. Someone had been working the motel, room by room and car by car, looking for easy targets. They had checked my car first, probably while I slept, unlocking it somehow or finding it unlocked, going through it for anything worth grabbing. Then they had come to my door, listening for signs of life, hoping for an empty room or a careless guest. When the lock held and the room stayed silent, they moved on. The fear did not fade right away. It sat heavy in my chest as I packed up and checked out. I did not look for the clerk. I did not linger. I got in my car, locked it twice, and pulled back onto the road. As the miles rolled by and Tucumcari shrank in the mirror, the night replayed itself in my head. The slow turn of the handle, the shadow under the door. It was not dramatic or mysterious. It was worse than that. It was ordinary. Someone doing what they had probably done many times before. Counting on tired travelers and thin locks, and the assumption that nothing would happen. By the time the sun climbed higher, and the road stretched empty ahead of me, my breathing finally eased. I knew exactly what had happened, and that clarity was its own kind of relief. I had been lucky. Careful enough, just barely. The thought stayed with me long after. Every time I checked into another motel, every time I heard footsteps outside a door in the middle of the night. I had been on Highway 101 for hours by then, the kind of late drive where the road noise turns into a steady pressure and your thoughts flatten out. I was heading south, past Crescent City, cutting through that long stretch where the trees crowd close and the ocean is somewhere off to the right, but completely invisible at night. It was early summer, but the air coming in through the cracked window was cold and damp, the kind that smells faintly of salt and wet leaves. I was tired but not drifting. I remember that clearly. I had stopped for gas less than an hour earlier, washed my face in the restroom, bought a bad coffee, done everything you do to stay alert. The fog started as a thin veil, the kind that just dulls the reflectors on the shoulder. Then it thickened fast. Within a mile it was swallowing everything beyond the hood of my car. My headlights bounced back at me in a white wall, and I eased off the gas without really thinking about it. 30 miles an hour felt reckless in that soup, but anything slower felt like I was tempting whatever truck might come up behind me. The road curved gently, familiar enough that I knew there weren't any sharp turns, but the fog made it feel like I was driving into nothing. That was when I saw the taillights. They were faint at first, 2 red dots hovering in the fog, maybe 100 feet ahead. I felt immediate relief. Another car meant I wasn't alone out there, and it gave me something to anchor to. I matched their speed without checking my speedometer at first, just letting the distance stay the same. After a few seconds I glanced down and saw I was doing exactly 30. The taillights stayed steady. No brake lights, no turn signals, no drift from side to side. They were centered perfectly in the lane. I followed like that for what felt like a long time. The fog thick enough that the lights would fade and brighten slightly as the road curved, but they never disappeared. I remember thinking how cautious the driver ahead must be, crawling along at that speed. Part of me was annoyed. Another part was grateful. I didn't pass. Passing felt insane in those conditions. The road noise was muted, like the fog was absorbing sound. Even my tires sounded softer. My windshield wipers squeaked with each slow pass, pushing away mist that reformed instantly. The red glow ahead was the only color in a world of gray. After a while, something about it started to bother me. I couldn't say exactly what at first. It was just a feeling that didn't fit. I checked the clock on the dash. A little after 2 a.m., I checked my speed again. Still 30. The taillights were the same distance away they had been the whole time. That's when I realized I hadn't seen them brake once. No slowing for curves, no quick tap when the fog thickened, just steady, unchanging light. I told myself the driver probably had cruise control on and was being extremely careful. I tried to focus on other things. The faint smell of damp upholstery, the way the fog made the reflectors on the guardrail flash into existence and vanish again. But my eyes kept going back to the taillights. The road straightened out for a stretch, and the fog thinned just a little. Not enough to see far, but enough that I should have been able to make out the shape of the car ahead. I leaned forward slightly, squinting. The taillights were there, clear as ever, but there was no body around them. No trunk line, no rear window, no silhouette. Just two red points floating at the right height for a car, moving forward at exactly my speed. My stomach tightened. I remember my hands gripping the wheel harder, the texture of the worn leather suddenly very real. I eased off the gas a touch to increase the distance, half expecting the lights to pull away or slow down. They stayed exactly where they were, maintaining that same gap like they were locked to me. I checked my mirrors, irrationally expecting to see something behind me. There was nothing. Just fog. I started doing small things to test reality. I tapped my brakes lightly, not enough to slow much. The distance didn't change. I sped up a few miles an hour, then slowed again. The lights adjusted perfectly, always staying ahead, always steady. I felt a cold flush go through me, the kind that starts in your chest and spreads outward. Another slight thinning of fog rolled through, enough that the road ahead was visible for maybe 50 yards. The taillights were still there, but the road between us was empty. No car, no shadow, no reflection, just asphalt and those lights hovering above it. That was the moment I seriously wondered if I was falling asleep. I rolled the window down all the way and let the cold air blast my face. I slapped my cheek once, hard enough to sting. Everything felt sharp and immediate. My heart was pounding. I was wide awake. The fog closed in again, and the lights remained, unbothered. I followed them for what I later learned was almost 12 minutes. At the time, it felt longer. My mind kept cycling through explanations. Some kind of optical illusion. Lights from a vehicle farther ahead being reflected. A motorcycle with oddly spaced lights. A trailer without a visible body. None of it made sense, but my brain kept reaching for something normal to grab onto. Then, as suddenly as the fog had thickened, it began to lift. Not all at once, but in rolling patches, like curtains being pulled back. I could see the white line on the shoulder clearly now, the dark wall of trees, the faint suggestion of the ocean to the right. The taillights were still ahead of me, and then they were gone. Not fading, not turning off, just not there anymore. The road ahead was empty for as far as my headlights reached. No car pulling away, no turnoff, nothing. I took my foot off the gas and coasted, my pulse hammering in my ears. I checked the road signs, half expecting to see a turnout or side road I'd missed. There was nothing nearby. Just trees and guardrail. I pulled over as soon as there was a wide enough shoulder, my hands shaking badly enough that it took effort to put the car in park. I sat there with the engine running, breathing hard, staring at the empty road ahead. I felt embarrassed and terrified at the same time, convinced I'd had some kind of microsleep or hallucination. The idea that my mind could just invent something so clear, so consistent, was almost worse than any other explanation. I stayed there for a long time before I felt steady enough to drive again. The rest of the trip passed without incident, but I didn't relax until daylight. A few days later, back home, I pulled the dashcam footage. I almost didn't. Part of me wanted to let it go, to blame exhaustion and move on. But I needed to know. The video showed exactly what I remembered, my headlights cutting through fog. Two red taillights ahead, steady and perfectly spaced, maintaining a constant distance. The timestamp showed them there for 11 minutes and 43 seconds. No visible vehicle body, even when the fog thinned. Just lights. I slowed the footage down and watched frame by frame. That's when I noticed something I'd missed in the car. The lights weren't perfectly smooth. They bobbed, just slightly, up and down, out of sync with each other by a fraction of a second. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I did some research after that, digging through transportation reports and local news. That stretch of Highway 101 is used at night by maintenance crews checking drainage and erosion, especially after heavy fog or rain. In some cases, they use slow, moving inspection rigs that aren't full vehicles, essentially flat platforms with mounted lights, towed or even manually guided for short distances. There were also reports of portable warning lights being tested along fog-prone sections, temporarily placed on lightweight frames to study driver response. The most likely explanation, pieced together from all of that, was that I had been following a set of mobile warning lights being repositioned or tested ahead of me, obscured by fog and distance. When the fog lifted enough and the lights were removed or pulled off the roadway, there was suddenly nothing there. In the conditions I was in, with limited visibility and no context, my brain filled in the rest, assuming a car where there was none. Knowing that helped in a way. It gave shape to the experience, put it back into the realm of the real. But even now, when I think about those red lights floating in the fog, matching me mile after mile, I still feel that tightness in my chest. Because whatever the explanation, in that moment, alone on a dark highway, following something I couldn't fully see, it felt like the road itself was playing a trick on me. And that feeling hasn't entirely gone away. The radiator blew just after sunset, not with a bang, but with a soft, ugly sound like something tearing under pressure. I was driving a narrow back road north of Lake Pontchartrain, trying to avoid traffic and shave time off a long day, when the temperature gauge jumped so fast I thought it was broken. Steam rolled up through the hood vents, and then the engine lost power in a slow, helpless way. I coasted as far as I could, but there was nowhere to go. No shoulder, no gravel, just pavement that dropped straight into swamp on both sides. I put the car in park and shut it off. The sudden quiet felt wrong. The road was still warm from the day, but the air had already turned heavy and wet, the kind that sticks to your skin. Mosquitoes found me immediately. I cracked the door for a second to look, then shut it again when I realized how deep the water was on both sides. The swamp was right there, dark and flat, broken only by reeds and cypress knees. Frogs were already loud. Somewhere deeper in the trees, something large moved through water slowly enough to make deliberate sounds. I popped the hood from inside and stayed in my seat. I knew better than to open it while the engine was still hot. I checked my phone. 1 bar of service, enough to send a request for roadside assistance, but not enough to load anything else. The app gave me an estimated wait time of 90 to 120 minutes. I remember thinking that seemed optimistic. Cars passed now and then, fast enough to rock my car with their wake. Most didn't slow. Headlights flashed across the swamp and were gone. It was getting dark quickly, the kind of dusk where the sky goes purple and then black without much warning. I turned on my hazards and kept the doors locked. I had the windows cracked an inch for air, but the humidity still pressed in. That was when a truck pulled over behind me. I saw the headlights slow in my mirror, then the right blinker, then the crunch of tires as it stopped partly on the road, because there was nowhere else to go. The engine stayed running. High beams stayed on, washing the inside of my car in white light and turning the windshield into a mirror. I could see myself reflected there, sweaty and wide-eyed. A man got out of the truck. I could tell from the shape of him and the way he moved, steady and unhurried. He walked up along the driver's side, staying just far enough back that I couldn't see his face clearly. He looked under the hood latch and gestured toward the front of my car, then back toward his truck. His body language was confident, like someone used to stopping for people on the side of the road. I shook my head and pointed at my phone, then at the hood, then made a locking motion with my hands. I did not open the door or lower the window any further. I stayed seated, seatbelt still on, foot resting on the brake out of habit even though the car was dead. He stood there longer than I expected. He did not get frustrated or angry. He just waited, hands on his hips, looking at me through the glass. The headlights behind him made his face impossible to read. I could see his outline clearly, though. Tall, broad shoulders, work boots sunk slightly into the soft edge of the pavement. The smell of hot engine and swamp mixed through the cracked window. Eventually, he stepped back. He shrugged once and walked away. I watched him in the side mirror as he climbed back into his truck. The door closed. The engine revved slightly. He pulled back onto the road and drove off, taillights shrinking until they disappeared around a bend. I told myself that was normal. People stop to help. People leave when help isn't accepted. That was the end of it. 10 minutes later, another truck came down the road slow enough that I noticed before I saw it. Same shape, same height, same pattern of lights across the grille. It did not stop this time. It passed me at a crawl, close enough that I could feel the heat from the engine and smell oil. As it went by, the driver's side window was down. The cab was dark, but I knew without knowing that the man inside was looking at me. The truck kept going. No turn signal, no acceleration, just steady speed until it disappeared the same way it had before. My hands started shaking then, not all at once but in small waves. I locked the doors even though they already were. I checked the mirrors constantly. I turned the interior lights off so I wouldn't be lit up like an aquarium. I raised the windows another half-inch despite the heat. Mosquitoes buzzed outside the glass, bumping against it again and again. I tried to focus on practical things. I checked the roadside assistance app. The driver was still an hour away. I texted my location to someone I trusted, dropping a pin and explaining briefly what was wrong. The message took longer than it should have to send. The swamp noises grew louder as full night settled in. Frogs, insects, the occasional splash of something large shifting position. The road itself felt isolated in a way that's hard to explain unless you've been there. A thin strip of human construction surrounded by land that did not care whether you were on it or not. Every set of headlights made my chest tighten. Most vehicles passed without slowing. A few did. None stopped again. I kept replaying the moment when the truck had come back. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence, but the road wasn't busy enough for that to feel convincing. I did not get out of the car. I did not open the hood. I stayed exactly where I was, watching the mirrors, checking the app, counting my breathing. I thought about how easy it would be for someone to open my door if I unlocked it even for a second. I thought about how no one would hear me if something went wrong. The swamp would swallow sound the same way it swallowed light. Time stretched. Sweat ran down my back. My phone battery ticked lower. I kept it plugged into a power bank and dimmed the screen as much as I could. When the roadside assistance truck finally appeared, it was obvious in a way that felt unreal. Flashing amber lights lit up the trees and turned the water beside the road into rippling gold. The driver parked in front of me to block traffic and walked back slowly, visible, official, wearing reflective gear. Only then did I unlock the door. Only then did I step out onto the pavement, my legs weak from sitting so long. The tow operator confirmed what I already knew. The radiator hose had failed completely. The engine was done for the night. The car would need to be towed to the nearest town, which was farther than I had thought. As he worked, traffic passed without stopping. No sign of the truck that had pulled over earlier. We loaded my car and I climbed into the cab of the tow truck. As we pulled away, I looked back at the stretch of road where I had been stuck. In the dark, it looked like nothing at all. Just pavement, swamp, and trees. No mark that I had ever been there. Later, in a well-lit parking lot with people around and doors opening and closing, the whole thing felt smaller. I could explain it away if I wanted. A helpful stranger. A coincidence. Bad timing. But I kept thinking about how long he stood there when I refused. How the same truck came back so soon. How exposed that road was once the sun went down. The car was repaired days later. I avoided that route after that, even in daylight. I stuck to busy highways and paid the extra time without complaint. I learned how thin the margin is between inconvenience and something worse, especially in places where the land is older than the road and the dark arrives fast. I had been on the road since before sunrise, moving east through Oregon with the kind of quiet focus that only comes after hours of steady driving. The sky had stayed low and gray all morning. The clouds stretched thin and flat, like a lid pressed down on the land. By late afternoon, the light had dulled even more, not quite evening, but already drained of warmth. My shoulders ached from sitting. My eyes felt dry. I was thinking about nothing more than the miles left, and whether I would stop for the night in Pendleton or push farther. The stretch of highway outside Pendleton is wide and open, long straight runs broken by gentle curves and stands of trees. It feels empty even when cars pass you, like there is too much space for the number of people moving through it. I had my window cracked, just enough to let in cold air to stay alert. The road noise blended into a steady hum that made time feel stretched and loose. I knew there was a wait station somewhere ahead, one of those pull-offs meant for trucks. I wasn't paying much attention to it. I just noticed the reflective signs first, then the turnoff itself. As I came closer, something felt off. The station was closed. The gates were down. No lights were on in the building. But right at the entrance, a car was parked sideways across the lane, blocking it almost completely. Its hazard lights were on. The orange flashes cut through the gray air in sharp, steady pulses. I eased off the gas without really thinking about it. My first instinct was that someone had broken down or slid into the entrance and needed help. It was automatic, the way you slow when something looks wrong. There were no other cars around me at that moment. The highway behind was empty. Ahead, the road curved slightly and dipped, disappearing into trees. As I got closer, I noticed the car wasn't damaged. It wasn't angled like an accident. It was placed there deliberately, straight across, too careful to be random. That was the first real warning, the kind that hits you quietly instead of all at once. I rolled closer, still moving but slower now, scanning the area. The trees around the station were dense, dark even in daylight. The ground beyond the pavement dropped away into brush and shadow. There was no movement at first, just the blinking lights and the sound of my own engine. I cracked my window a little more, partly from habit, partly because the air inside the car felt stale. That was when I saw motion at the edge of the trees, not far from the car. 3 shapes stepped forward, separating from the shadows in a way that made my stomach tighten instantly. They didn't wave. They didn't signal. They just came out of the trees and started walking toward the road, spreading slightly as they moved. Their clothes were dark and loose. I couldn't make out faces clearly, only the way they moved with purpose, not surprise. They had been waiting. Everything in my body reacted at once. My foot came down hard on the gas. The engine jumped, the sound sudden and loud in the quiet space. I yanked the wheel to the left, aiming for the narrow gap between the sideways car and the edge of the road. The tires screamed as I crossed the painted line. My side mirror clipped something and folded in with a sharp crack. Metal scraped along metal, a long grinding sound that felt like it went on forever. The car shuddered but kept moving. I didn't slow. I didn't look at them directly. I stared at the road ahead and pushed. In the rearview mirror, just for a second, I saw them reach the parked car. Their movements were quick and practiced. They leaned into it, all 3 at once, and the car shifted. The hazard lights bounced as the front end dragged farther into the road, blocking more of the lane. That image burned into my mind as the highway straightened, and I put distance between us. My hands were shaking so badly I had to loosen my grip on the wheel to keep from overcorrecting. My heart was pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. The cold air coming through the window felt sharp against my face. I drove for several miles before I let myself slow down. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting headlights to appear behind me. None did. The road stayed empty. The land rolled past, brown and gray, fields and trees blurring together. I became painfully aware of every sound my car made, every vibration, every slight pull in the steering. When I reached the edge of the next town, I pulled into a gas station without really deciding to. I needed light, people, something solid. Under the bright canopy, I finally got out of the car and looked at the damage. The door was scraped deep, the paint peeled back to bare metal in places. My mirror hung loose, cracked but still attached. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the smell of fuel and cold air, letting the shaking ease. The normal sounds of the station felt unreal, like they belonged to another world. I bought nothing. I just used the phone inside to report what I had seen, stumbling through the details because my mind kept replaying the moment they stepped out of the trees. Later, after I had driven to the local station and made a full report, I learned more than I wanted to know. The officer who took my statement didn't interrupt me. His expression changed as I described the car, the lights, the way it was placed. By the time I finished, his face had gone tight and serious. He told me, without using dramatic words, that the area around that wait station had been tied to several violent robberies over the years. People traveling alone, late afternoon or early evening, a staged breakdown, a blocked road. The same pattern every time. In some cases, the victims were found hours later. In others, not at all. The reason it stuck with him, he explained, was that most people stop. I spent the night in Pendleton, even though I had planned to drive farther. I couldn't bring myself to get back on the highway in the dark. I kept seeing those hazard lights blinking against the trees, the way the car moved when they pushed it, the certainty in their steps. In the morning, I walked out to my car and ran my hand along the scraped door. The damage looked worse in daylight, rough and ugly, a permanent mark. But it also felt like proof. Proof that I had made it through something real and close and dangerous. I took a different route when I left town. It added time, but I didn't care. As the miles passed and the landscape opened up again, my breathing finally settled back into a normal rhythm. The road became just a road again, not a threat waiting to reveal itself. Even now, when I think about that trip, it isn't the fear that stays with me the longest. It's the ordinary way it began. A closed station, a car with its hazard lights on. A moment where helping felt like the obvious thing to do. And the quiet knowledge that if I had followed that instinct, I would not have driven away. I had planned that stretch of US 50 like it was just another empty line on a map. The loneliest road in America gets romanticized that way, as if the emptiness is a feature you can enjoy at your own pace. I had crossed Nevada before in summer, driven for hours with nothing but tan hills and long, straight pavement, radio stations fading in and out like breathing. Winter changes the rules, and I forgot that somewhere between Ely and Austin, with the sun dropping fast and the temperature sinking harder than I expected. The storm had been on the forecast, but the forecast looked mild on my phone earlier that day. Snow showers, gusty winds, nothing dramatic. By the time it caught me, it was full dark, the kind that eats headlights. Snow wasn't falling straight down. It came sideways, hard pellets stinging the windshield, piling up faster than the wipers could clear. The road markers vanished first, then the shoulder, then the horizon itself. I slowed to a crawl, following the faint gray ribbon where the pavement might be. Every few seconds the wind shoved the car sideways, a firm hand pressing against the door. I remember thinking I could push through another 10 miles, find a town, a gas station, anything with light. Then the whiteout closed completely. Headlights reflected back at me like a wall. I could not see the hood of my own car. I could not tell if I was still centered in the lane or drifting into the ditch. The idea of meeting an oncoming truck in that soup made my stomach tighten. I lifted my foot off the gas and coasted, until I felt the crunch of snow at the edge of the pavement. I eased off onto what I hoped was a turnout. The car shuddered and settled, snow hissing against the doors. I turned off the headlights to keep the glare down and sat there with the engine running, heater on low to save fuel. The wind rocked the car, steady and relentless. Snow piled against the windshield until the world outside disappeared completely. I checked my phone. No signal. The time glowed bright and wrong in the dark. I told myself this was temporary. I would wait it out. Storms pass. Plows come through. US 50 might be lonely, but it is still a highway. Minutes stretched. The car ticked and hummed. Condensation crept up the glass. Every so often I cracked the window to keep it from fogging, letting a blade of cold air cut across my face. It smelled clean and sharp, like metal and ice. I tried to picture where I was exactly, but all the landmarks I remembered from the map were vague. A turnout near a pass, maybe. Somewhere between nothing and nothing. About 20 minutes in, I noticed a dull glow behind me, faint at first, then brighter. Headlights, softened by snow. Relief washed through me so fast it surprised me. Another vehicle meant I wasn't alone out there. It meant help if I needed it, or at least confirmation that the road still existed. The lights came closer, closer than I expected, and then stopped. I felt the car behind me through the seat, the vibration of an idling engine transmitted through snow and air. They had parked too close. Close enough that their headlights filled my mirrors, white and harsh, throwing my own interior into sharp relief. I reached up and flipped the rearview mirror to the dim setting, but the light still bled around the edges. I considered turning off my engine, but the heater was the only thing keeping my hands from going numb. I stayed still, watching snow race past the windows. I waited for hazard lights, for a horn, for something normal. Nothing happened. The engine behind me kept running steady. The wind roared. The silence inside my car felt thick. Then something hit the glass on the driver's side. A single knock, firm enough to be deliberate. I froze. My first instinct was that it was someone checking to see if I was okay. My second instinct was to keep absolutely still. I did not roll down the window. I did not unlock the door. I did not even turn my head. I stared at the speedometer and listened to my own breathing. Another knock followed, harder. The sound carried through the door panel and into my chest. Snow rattled against the roof. The car behind me idled on. I imagined a shape standing just outside my window, coat pulled tight, face hidden by blowing snow. I told myself that if I waited, they would move on, assuming I was asleep or already in trouble beyond their help. The knocking turned into pounding. Not frantic, not panicked. Just forceful. Repeated strikes that made the window flex. Each impact was measured, like someone testing how much it would take to get my attention or break through. My hands shook on my lap. I thought about the thinness of glass, about how alone I was, about how far the nearest town might be. I thought about cracking the window just enough to speak, and then I thought about how fast that could go wrong in a place like this. I stayed silent. Eventually it stopped. The sudden absence of sound was almost worse. I waited for the knock to start again. It didn't. Instead, the engine behind me revved slightly, then settled. Headlights shifted as the car backed up a little, tires crunching in the snow. The glow moved, swung wide, then faded as the vehicle pulled back onto the road. The taillights blurred red through the storm and were gone. I did not move for a long time after that. I kept the engine running and watched the snow bury the world. My thoughts circled uselessly, replaying the pounding, the closeness of it. I told myself that whoever it was had just been checking on me and left when I didn't respond. I told myself that was the most reasonable explanation. I also told myself that reasonable explanations do not involve parking that close in a whiteout on a highway with no visibility. The storm eased sometime before dawn. I must have slept in short, shallow bursts, because I remember waking to the silence first. The wind had dropped. Snow still fell, but straight down now, gentle and steady. Gray light seeped into the car, revealing a world reshaped overnight. I turned off the engine and stepped out, my boots sinking deep immediately. My car sat alone in a wide turnout, snow piled halfway up the doors. The road beyond was faint but visible, two pale tracks cutting through the white. What stopped me cold were the footprints. They were everywhere around my car. Clear impressions in the fresh snow, boots with a deep tread, circling, pacing, stopping at each door. There were marks where someone had stood by my window, toes pointed toward the glass. More prints led to the front of the car, back again, overlapping in places as if the person had walked around multiple times. The snow had preserved them perfectly. There were no other tire tracks. Not behind me, not ahead. Just my own, partially filled in by drifting snow, leading off the turnout and disappearing into the white. The tracks from the car that had parked behind me were gone entirely, erased by wind and new snowfall. The footprints, however, were sheltered close to my vehicle, protected by the bulk of it. They remained sharp, undeniable. I followed them with my eyes, my breath fogging the cold air. They did not wander away into the open desert. They stopped abruptly near where another car would have been parked, then ended, as if the person had gotten back inside and driven off. I walked the perimeter slowly, counting steps without meaning to. There was no sign of anyone else now, no movement, no sound but the distant hiss of wind across empty land. Later, when a plow finally came through and I was able to drive again, the explanation formed itself piece by piece. In the night, the wind had scarred the road clean and filled it again, erasing tire tracks faster than they could settle. The turnout, slightly lower and shielded, held on to what fell there. A person on foot left deeper impressions than tires gliding over packed snow. Whoever had stopped behind me had likely been another driver caught in the storm. Maybe checking on the only other car they could see. Maybe they had gotten nervous when I didn't respond, or impatient, or something else entirely. The storm had done the rest, cleaning up after them. That explanation fits the facts. It is neat and logical. It is the one I tell myself when I think back on that night on US 50. What stays with me is not the logic, but the memory of those footprints, tight around my car, and the sound of pounding on glass in a place where help feels very far away. I was driving east on Route 50 later than I meant to be. The kind of late where your eyes feel dry no matter how much you blink and the radio volume keeps creeping up. Because silence feels heavier than noise. I had been on the road since before dawn, cutting across Ohio into West Virginia, telling myself I could make it through in one push. The day had gone long and gray, and by the time the sky finally went black, the mountains closed in on both sides of the highway. Route 50 felt narrow even where it wasn't, pressed tight between trees that swallowed the shoulders and reflected back only small slices of my headlights. When Google Maps chirped and rerouted me due to construction, I didn't think twice. I had followed worse detours before. I trusted the blue line without really looking at where it was taking me. I turned off the main road and immediately felt the difference. The pavement went from smooth to rough in a matter of yards. The yellow center line disappeared. The white edge lines vanished too, leaving me floating in a tunnel of blacktop and darkness. My headlights seemed weaker out there, swallowed by trees that leaned in close like they were curious. The road narrowed fast. It twisted without warning, sharp bends coming one after another. There were no streetlights, no reflectors, no guardrails. Just trees and the occasional house set far back from the road, their windows dark, their yards unmarked, mailboxes leaning or missing altogether. The kind of places you pass without really seeing, except you can feel them watching as you go by. I slowed down, gripping the wheel tighter. The sound of my tires on the pavement changed, louder and hollow like the road beneath me was thinner. Every few minutes I passed something that looked abandoned. A sagging fence swallowed by weeds. A rusted-out car half sunk into the ground. A barn with its roof collapsed inward, boards caved and gray with age. I noticed it because it sat close to the road, closer than anything else, its broken shape catching my headlights in a way that made it stand out. I kept driving, telling myself it was just a back road, that this was normal for rural West Virginia. Still, the feeling of being out of place kept growing. My phone screen dimmed as the signal bars dropped from 1 to none. The map froze. The blue dot stuck in place while the road ahead kept moving. I glanced at it too often, hoping it would refresh, but it stayed blank and useless in my hand. After what felt like 15 minutes, maybe more, I saw the collapsed barn again. Same caved roof. Same crooked beams. Same patch of weeds glowing pale in my headlights. I told myself it had to be another one. That old barns all look alike out there. But something about the angle of it, the way the road bent just before it appeared, felt too familiar. My stomach tightened, and I slowed almost to a crawl. I kept going. The road dipped and climbed, curled back on itself. The trees never broke. No signs, no mile markers. Just darkness and the steady hum of my engine. Then the engine light blinked on. At first I thought it was a glitch. I had just had the car serviced a month earlier. I eased off the gas, listening for any change in the engine sound. It still ran smooth, but the light stayed on, a steady orange glow that felt much brighter than it should have in the dark. I drove a little farther, hoping I'd come out somewhere familiar. Instead, the road narrowed again, the pavement crumbling at the edges into loose gravel. My headlights caught a gravel driveway on the right, barely more than a break in the weeds. Across from it, set back from the road, stood a small house I hadn't noticed before. As I slowed, the porch light flicked on. It wasn't bright, just a single bulb casting a dull yellow circle on the porch boards. A man stepped out into the light. He didn't wave or move toward the road. He just stood there, hands at his sides, facing my car. I couldn't see his face clearly, only the outline of his body and the way he held himself still, like he had been waiting. The engine light stayed on. My phone was dead to the world. The road behind me felt just as wrong as the road ahead. I pulled over near the gravel driveway without fully meaning to, my tires crunching softly as I stopped. The car idled, the sound suddenly too loud in the quiet. I felt exposed sitting there, my headlights washing over the weeds in the edge of the yard. The man didn't move. He didn't come closer. He didn't turn away. He just stood there in that weak circle of light watching. I sat frozen, heart pounding harder than it had all day. My mind ran through explanations I didn't like. Maybe I was on private land without realizing it. Maybe the road looped through someone's property. Maybe he was just curious why a car had stopped there so late at night. None of those thoughts made the feeling in my chest ease. I turned the key and shut the engine off, then immediately regretted it. The sudden silence felt wrong. Too final. I started the car again, and for a split second nothing happened. Then the engine turned over and caught, the sound rushing back like a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The man was still there. I didn't back up. I didn't try to turn around. The road was too narrow, and the thought of fumbling a 3-point turn in front of that house made my hands shake. Instead, I pressed the gas and cut the wheel hard, driving straight through the edge of the yard. My tires bounced over uneven ground, brushing past tall grass and small rocks. The headlights jolted, lighting up a blur of weeds and the side of the house as I aimed for where the yard met the road again. I didn't look back. I didn't slow down once I hit pavement. The car shuddered, then steadied, and I pushed it faster than felt smart on that narrow road. The engine light stayed on, but the car kept moving, and that was all I cared about. The road eventually widened. The trees thinned. A faded sign appeared, then another. My phone buzzed as signal bars crept back onto the screen. The map refreshed, snapping my blue dot into place like nothing had happened. I didn't recognize the road name, but it led me back toward Route 50. I drove until the sky started to lighten, the black turning to deep blue, then gray. I stopped at the first gas station I saw, hands still tight on the wheel even after I shut the engine off. In the daylight, everything felt smaller. The fear faded into something I could examine instead of just feel. Later that morning, after coffee and a few hours of restless sleep, I checked the road on my laptop. The detour Google Maps had sent me on cut through a patchwork of old county roads near Grafton, some of them looping and reconnecting in ways that made no sense unless you knew them. I found a satellite image that showed two collapsed barns less than a mile apart, nearly identical in shape and position. The road curved around both of them, creating the illusion of a loop where there wasn't one. The house with the porch sat along a stretch of road where cars rarely passed at night. The driveway I'd stopped near wasn't marked, because it wasn't meant for visitors. The man who stepped out onto the porch likely did what anyone out there would do when headlights stopped near their property after dark. He turned on the light to see who it was. The engine light turned out to be a loose gas cap, jostled just enough by the rough road to trigger the sensor. The car had never been in real danger of dying. All of that made sense. Every part of it could be explained. Still, when I think back on that stretch of road, the way the darkness pressed in and the houses sat far apart and watchful, I remember how small I felt, how quickly familiar rules disappeared once the lines on the road were gone. I trusted a blue line on a screen and ended up somewhere I didn't belong, relying on luck and momentum to get me out. Even now, with daylight explanations and maps to prove it was just geography and timing, I know I won't take that detour again.